The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Margaret and Henry Miller pulled their old pickup truck into the circular driveway of the Grand Heritage Hotel. The building stood tall and proud with its limestone facade gleaming in the early light and brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine. Margaret clutched her worn handbag a little tighter as she looked up at the impressive structure. They had been driving for nearly 6 hours and the weariness showed in the lines around their eyes and the way Henry's shoulders slumped forward as he turned off the engine. They had come to the city for their granddaughter's college graduation ceremony scheduled for the next morning. It was meant to be a joyous occasion, but the journey had taken longer than expected. A detour due to road construction had added 2 extra hours to their trip and now it was nearly midnight. Every hotel they had passed along the highway had displayed the dreaded, "No vacancy" sign glowing red in the darkness. Henry helped Margaret out of the truck and they made their way slowly up the wide stone steps. Their clothes were simple and practical. Henry wore his cleanest pair of denim overalls over a flannel shirt and Margaret had on a floral dress she had sewn herself decades ago. Their shoes were comfortable but clearly well worn from years of honest work on their small farm 2 states away. The lobby took Margaret's breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling casting warm light across marble floors that reflected like still water. Elegant furniture upholstered in rich fabrics was arranged in intimate seating areas. Fresh flowers in tall vases perfumed the air with the scent of roses and lilies. A grand piano sat silent in one corner and oil paintings in gilded frames adorned the walls. Behind the reception desk stood 3 young women in crisp uniforms speaking quietly among themselves. They looked up as Henry and Margaret approached and Margaret noticed the way their expressions changed. The smiles that had been on their faces moments before faded into something else. Something that made Margaret's heart sink a little. Before Henry could speak, a man emerged from an office behind the desk. He wore an expensive suit with a name tag that identified him as Richard Blackwood, hotel manager. His hair was slicked back perfectly and his shoes shone with fresh polish. He took one look at the elderly couple and his lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Can I help you?" His tone was clipped and cold, carrying none of the warmth that should accompany such words. Henry cleared his throat. "Yes sir, we were hoping you might have a room available for the night. We've been driving for hours and everywhere else is full up. Our granddaughter is graduating tomorrow morning and we just need a place to rest our heads for one night." Richard Blackwood looked them up and down, slowly taking in every detail of their appearance. His gaze lingered on Henry's overalls, on the small tear in Margaret's dress, on their weathered faces and calloused hands. When he finally spoke, his voice dripped with condescension. "I'm afraid this establishment caters to a certain caliber of clientele. Our rooms start at $400 per night and I suspect that's well beyond your means." He said the words loudly enough that other guests in the lobby turned to look. "Perhaps you would be more comfortable at one of the budget motels on the outskirts of town. There's a place about 15 miles from here that charges by the hour, if you know what I mean." The 3 receptionists behind him giggled and Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. But it wasn't embarrassment that colored her face. It was the sting of being judged so harshly for the simple crime of not looking wealthy. Henry straightened his shoulders. Despite his 72 years, there was still strength in his frame from a lifetime of physical labor. "Sir, I asked about a room, not a handout. My wife and I have money to pay. We've worked hard all our lives and saved. We may not look like your typical guests, but our money spends just the same as anyone else's." Richard Blackwood's expression turned even more sour. "Listen, old-timer, I don't have time for this. We're a 5-star hotel, not a homeless shelter. Even if I did have a room available, which I'm not saying I do, I wouldn't rent it to someone who looks like they just walked off a farm. You'd probably track mud all over the carpets or worse. Now I'm going to ask you nicely one time to leave before I have security escort you out." Margaret reached for Henry's arm, feeling him tense beside her. She knew her husband's temper, and while he was generally the gentlest man she'd ever known, he didn't take kindly to disrespect, especially when it was directed at her. "Henry, let's just go. We'll find somewhere else." But Henry wasn't ready to leave just yet. He looked Richard Blackwood straight in the eye and spoke with a calm dignity that somehow made him seem taller than his actual height. "You know something, Mr. Blackwood, I've learned a lot in my 72 years on this earth. One of the most important lessons is that you can tell the true measure of a person not by how they treat those who can do something for them, but by how they treat those who can't. You've judged us based purely on our appearance without knowing a single thing about who we are or what we've accomplished in our lives. That says far more about you than it does about us." Richard Blackwood's face flushed red. "How dare you lecture me in my own hotel? Security." He raised his hand to signal to a uniformed guard standing near the entrance. "Wait just a moment." A new voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see a young woman in a green blazer stepping forward from where she had been standing near the piano. She looked to be in her early 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile. Her name tag identified her as Sarah Chen, assistant manager. She walked directly to Henry and Margaret, extending her hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Henry said, shaking her hand. "Henry and Margaret Miller. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, it's a pleasure to meet you. I couldn't help but overhear, and I want to apologize for the discourteous treatment you've received. We do indeed have rooms available, and I would be honored to get you checked in. In fact, we have a lovely suite on the 3rd floor with a beautiful view of the city. I think you'd be very comfortable there." Richard Blackwood sputtered. "Sarah, what do you think you're doing? I'm the manager here and I've already told these people to leave." Sarah turned to face him, and though her voice remained professional, there was steel beneath the courtesy. "Mr. Blackwood, I've worked at this hotel for 8 years. I know our policies and I know our values. The Grand Heritage Hotel was founded on principles of hospitality and respect for all guests. Those principles don't include turning away paying customers because of how they're dressed. If you have a problem with me checking in Mr. and Mrs. Miller, you're welcome to take it up with ownership. In fact, I have Mr. Henderson's personal number if you'd like to call him right now." The mention of the owner's name made Richard Blackwood's face go even redder, but he took a step back. "Fine, do whatever you want. But when this backfires, don't come crying to me." He stormed off toward his office and slammed the door behind him. Sarah turned back to Henry and Margaret with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry about that. Please don't judge our entire hotel by one person's bad behavior. Now let's get you checked in and settled. You must be exhausted from your drive." As Sarah worked efficiently at the computer, Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. This young woman had stood up for them when she didn't have to. She had seen them as people, not as stereotypes. "That's very kind of you, dear," Margaret said softly. "We really do appreciate it. And please don't worry about the cost." Henry wasn't exaggerating when he said we can pay. "It's just that we've never been much for fancy things. We prefer to spend our money on family and experiences rather than expensive clothes." Sarah's smile widened. "Mrs. Miller, those sound like exactly the right priorities to me. Now, the suite I mentioned is normally $600 per night, but I'm going to give you our senior discount, which brings it down to $450. Will that work for you?" Henry nodded, pulling out his wallet. "That'll work just fine." He counted out cash bills worn soft from use and handed them to Sarah. As she processed their payment, Sarah made small talk. "So your granddaughter is graduating tomorrow. That's wonderful. What's she studying?" Margaret's whole face lit up. "Medicine. She's going to be a doctor. First person in our family to go to college at all, let alone medical school. We're so proud we could just about burst." "That's incredible," Sarah said genuinely. "You must have done something right raising her parents to have a granddaughter accomplish so much." "We tried our best," Henry said. "We couldn't give our kids much in terms of material things, but we gave them love and taught them the value of hard work and education. Looks like those lessons stuck." Sarah handed them their room keys along with vouchers for complimentary breakfast. "Here you are. 3rd floor, room 312. The elevators are just past that column. Is there anything else I can help you with? Do you need help with luggage?" "Just one small bag in the truck," Henry said. "I can manage it. Thank you again, young lady. You've restored an old man's faith in humanity." "It was my pleasure, Mr. Miller. Truly. Have a wonderful night and congratulations again on your granddaughter's graduation." As Henry and Margaret made their way to the elevator, Margaret noticed several other guests watching them with curious expressions. She held her head high. They had every right to be there just as much as anyone else. The suite took Margaret's breath away for the second time that night. It was larger than their entire living room and kitchen back home. The bed looked like something from a magazine with its plush pillows and pristine white linens. Through the window they could see the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Henry set their small overnight bag on the luggage rack and turned to his wife. "Well, Maggie, we made it." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed testing its softness. "That we did. Though for a minute there I wasn't sure we would. That manager was something else, wasn't he?" "He was," Henry agreed, sitting beside her. "But that young woman Sarah, she was something else too. In a good way. Made me think maybe there's hope for the world yet." They got ready for bed, moving through the familiar routine they'd performed together for nearly 50 years. As they lay in the darkness, Margaret reached for Henry's hand. "Do you remember when we first got married?" she asked. "We had nothing. That tiny apartment with the bathroom down the hall and the radiator that clanked all night." Henry chuckled. "I remember. We were so poor we had to decide whether to buy groceries or pay the electric bill. But I don't recall us being unhappy." "No," Margaret agreed. "We weren't unhappy at all. We had each other and that was enough." Still is," Henry echoed, squeezing her hand. The next morning they woke early and dressed in their best clothes. Henry wore the suit he'd bought 30 years ago for their son's wedding. It was outdated in style but clean and pressed. Margaret wore a navy dress with a matching jacket and the pearl earrings Henry had given her for their 25th anniversary. At breakfast in the hotel restaurant they were treated with courtesy by the staff. A young waiter brought them coffee and took their order with genuine friendliness. As they ate scrambled eggs and toast, Margaret noticed Richard Blackwood enter the restaurant. He saw them and his expression soured, but he said nothing, just turned and walked out. "Some people never learn," Henry murmured. After breakfast they made their way to the university where the graduation ceremony would be held. The auditorium was enormous and filling quickly with proud families. They found seats near the middle and waited as the rows filled around them. When the graduates began to file in wearing their black robes and mortarboards, Margaret gripped Henry's hand tightly. She scanned the sea of young faces, looking for the one she knew as well as her own. Then she saw her, Emma Miller, walking with her head high and a smile bright enough to light up the entire room. Emma had gotten her height from Henry's side of the family and her determination from Margaret's. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through college and medical school, taking every scholarship she could find and studying late into the night. Now here she was about to receive her doctorate degree. When Emma's name was called and she walked across the stage to accept her diploma, both Henry and Margaret had tears streaming down their faces. Around them other families applauded for their own graduates, but in that moment it felt like the entire auditorium was celebrating Emma. After the ceremony they waited in the designated meeting area. Emma came running toward them, still in her graduation gown, and launched herself into their arms. "Grandma, Grandpa, you made it. I was so worried when you didn't call last night. We got in late," Henry explained. "Didn't want to wake you before your big day. We're so proud of you, Emma. So very proud." Emma hugged them tighter. "I couldn't have done it without you. When Mom and Dad died and you took me in, you could have just kept me fed and clothed. But you did so much more. You showed me that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. You taught me that hard work and integrity matter more than anything else. You did all the hard work yourself, sweetheart," Margaret said. "We just loved you." "That's everything though," Emma said. "That's the foundation for everything else. Love and support and believing in someone even when things are hard." They spent the afternoon celebrating at Emma's favorite restaurant, nothing fancy, just a local diner with good food and generous portions. Emma talked about her plans. She'd been accepted into a residency program at a hospital that served underprivileged communities. "I want to help people who might not otherwise have access to good healthcare," she explained. "People who get overlooked or dismissed because of how they look or how much money they have. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." Henry and Margaret exchanged a meaningful look. Their granddaughter had learned those lessons well. As the sun began to set they drove Emma to her small apartment to help her pack. She would be moving across the country in a week to start her residency. The apartment was modest but clean. Emma had never asked them for money beyond what they'd given her for emergencies. She'd been determined to make her own way. "You know," Emma said as she folded clothes into a suitcase. "I used to be embarrassed when I was younger. When the other kids talked about their parents' fancy jobs and big houses, I'd feel ashamed that my grandparents were farmers. I thought we were poor." "Well, we never had much money," Margaret said gently. "But we were never poor," Emma continued. "Not in any way that matters. I had 2 people who loved me unconditionally. Who showed up to every school play and science fair. Who taught me to value character over possessions? That's not poverty. That's wealth beyond measure. And I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. Oh honey, Margaret said, pulling Emma into a hug. You don't have anything to apologize for. You were a child figuring out the world. We understood. That evening, as Henry and Margaret drove back to the Grand Heritage Hotel to collect their things before starting the long drive home, they felt a deep sense of contentment. They'd raised a good son who had married a good woman, and together they'd given the world Emma. That was a legacy worth more than any fortune. When they walked through the hotel lobby, they were surprised to see Sarah Chen waiting near the front desk. She smiled and walked over to them. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to say goodbye properly and to give you something. She handed them an envelope. Inside is a voucher for a complimentary weekend stay at any time you'd like to visit your granddaughter. I spoke with the owner, Mr. Henderson, and told him about what happened last night. He was appalled by Mr. Blackwood's behavior and wanted to make amends. That's very generous, Henry said, but not necessary. You already made everything right. I insist, Sarah said. And there's something else you should know. Mr. Blackwood is no longer employed here. Mr. Henderson felt that someone who judges people so harshly and treats them with such contempt doesn't represent the values of this hotel. I've been promoted to general manager. Congratulations, Margaret said warmly. You'll be wonderful in that role. You have a kind heart, and that's the most important qualification of all. Sarah's eyes grew bright with emotion. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. You see, my own grandparents were immigrants. They came to this country with nothing and worked incredibly hard to build a life. They were often looked down upon because of their accents and their clothes. But they were the finest people I've ever known. When I saw how Mr. Blackwood treated you, it reminded me of the stories they used to tell. I couldn't let that stand. Not in a place where I work. Henry extended his hand. Your grandparents raised a good granddaughter. They'd be proud of you. Sarah shook his hand, then impulsively hugged both of them. Travel safely. And please do come back to visit. As they drove away from the city, Margaret looked out at the darkening sky. You know, Henry, life is funny. We came here expecting to just celebrate Emma's graduation. But we got so much more than that. We got a reminder that kindness still exists. That standing up for what's right matters. That there are still good people in the world. Like that young Sarah, Henry agreed. She saw us as people, not as stereotypes. That's rare. Not as rare as you might think, Margaret said. For every person like that awful manager, there are a dozen like Sarah. We just have to remember to look for them. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the city lights faded behind them and the countryside opened up before them. Eventually they'd return to their small farm with its modest house and well-worn furniture. They'd return to their simple life of early mornings and honest work. But they'd carry with them the memory of this weekend. The pride of watching their granddaughter achieve her dreams. The reminder that dignity and respect should be given freely regardless of someone's appearance or station in life. And most importantly, the reaffirmation that the values they'd lived by and passed down through their family were the right ones after all. As Margaret began to doze off in the passenger seat, Henry reached over and gently squeezed her hand. After 50 years of marriage, he knew that they'd made the right choices. Not the easy choices always, but the right ones. They'd chosen love over money. They'd chosen integrity over convenience. They'd chosen kindness over judgment. And in doing so, they'd created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Emma would carry those values forward, treating her patients with dignity and compassion. And perhaps someday she'd have children of her own who would learn the same lessons. That was true wealth. That was what mattered. And as Henry Miller drove his old pickup truck through the night heading home, he felt richer than any man had a right to feel.